times. And now we allow our breathing to return to its normal pattern. And again, we think about our motivation. We set that in the prayers, but now we're going to kind of emphasize it. And any motivation that has brought us to this meeting tonight is great. If we came out of just curiosity, or just wanted a little bit of mental stimulation, or we're curious about the subject, those are all great. But it's said that the highest and most valuable motivation, the one that is of greatest benefit to both ourselves and to others, is the bodhicitta motivation, the great mind meditation. And that's the thought that everything I do, including this meditation and coming to this class tonight, is done so that I may become enlightened for the benefit of others. Everything I do is so that I become enlightened for the benefit of others. That may seem a little bit grandiose or high-flown, but just think along those lines for a moment, even if it doesn't come easily to think that way. Excuse me. And having set our motivation, we now begin the actual meditation, just concentrating on the breath. We place the mind, our awareness, our concentration on the physical sensation of the breath moving in and out through our nostrils. Just the slightly cool movement of air through the nostrils at the openings of our nose. Direct perception of that. We're not visualizing it. We're not describing it to ourselves. We're not even going to count it. We're just going to directly perceive, be aware, so that we can say that the mind and the breath are non-dual. There is no difference between the mind perceiving the breath and the physical sensation of the breath. And we'll just stick with that practice for the next 7 or 8 minutes. Every time our mind wanders off to another object, we just set that aside and come back to the breath over and over and over again. And now we can end our meditation with a dedication. We always begin by setting our motivation. We always end by doing a dedication that kind of gives some structure to the session. And we acknowledge that we've done something a little bit out of the unusual by sitting quietly in this way, working with our mind, developing some power of concentration, and that this has made a positive imprint on our mind. And we think, may this positive imprint not be lost, may it not dissipate, but may it ripen in the future in a way that benefits all living beings. And you can relax your concentration now. Okay, let's see, Linda, did we have any questions from last week?
I did not receive any.
Okay. If you do have any questions that come up during the week about tonight's class, you can forward them to Linda and we'll discuss them next week. So tonight we're going to continue our discussion of Buddhist refuge. Refuge is frequently described as the gateway for entering the Buddhist path. And there is an actual refuge ceremony that people participate in. That's as much as anything, that is what makes you a practicing Buddhist, if you've taken refuge in an official ceremony. And that ceremony is given by a qualified teacher, and it typically comes accompanied by an opportunity to take the 5 lay vows. And we'll talk about the actual ceremony in the last class, in the 5th class, what's that's like. And you can think about whether that's something you may want to participate in someday. But it's important that we understand that refuge is not a one-time event. You say, okay, I've taken refuge, check that off, I'm going to move on to Tantra or something like that. Refuge is a continual process. It's a state of mind. It's an active process in that it implies moving in a particular direction towards a particular goal. And the definition I gave last week, I'm going to shorten it a little bit. A direction that one puts in one's life that will protect one from true suffering and its true causes. So it is a direction that we are actively moving in. And if we are Buddhist, we take refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, what are frequently referred to as the 3 jewels of refuge. And we'll be talking about those over the next several weeks, what the Buddha and Dharma and Sangha represent. But before we get into that tonight, I wanted to put this subject kind of in the context of some of the other teachings that have been covered in some of the other Discovering Buddhism classes. I think it's very helpful to see where this fits in the big picture. So these Discovering Buddhism classes are based on an organization of the Buddha's teachings that's referred to as the Lam Rim, which means the graduated path. At first I thought it meant the gradual path, and for most of us it is very gradual, but it's graduated in that it's a series of steps or a series of topics. And if you cover all of them, as we do in Discovering Buddhism, and master each one completely, and as they say, realize it, which means it lives in your heart and your mind. It's not just teachings that you could take a test on and pass, but it is actually the way you think and approach the world. If you realize each one of those topics, you achieve the state of enlightenment or Buddhahood. So that, even though it seems quite simple, there's an enormous amount in this organizational structure. And the Lam Rim is split up into three categories. The first is the teachings of the lesser scope, then the teachings of the middle scope, and then there are the teachings of the higher scope. And I don't really want to get into what the implications of those labels are, but it's kind of, if you were to do them sequentially, it'd be like moving through higher education, through your master's degree and up into your PhD and your postdoc studies and everything. Most of us, though, are, we're jumping around and we're working on various ones of these topics simultaneously. We'll be doing a lesser scope topic, and we'll be working with something in the higher scope, and that's perfectly okay. Or that's pretty much the standard way. You really can't do it, or it'd be very difficult to do it all sequentially. But I'm just going to talk about the ones in the lesser scope, because that's what we're talking about when we're talking about refuge. The teachings of the lesser scope are basically freedom from personal suffering, okay? This is about getting your own act together so that as you practice the middle scope and the higher scope, you're not dealing with your own dramas and problems. You're actually more able to help others, okay? Lesser scope is about getting your own act together, freedom from personal suffering, or personal liberation, as we call. Middle and higher scopes are about benefiting others. So together that makes the whole path. And if we are a Tibetan and our parents ship us off to the monastery or the nunnery, and we're 9 or 10 years old maybe, we have to understand that we come in with an acceptance, past and future lives, it's a given, okay? It's like the sky is blue. We just accept that. That's part of our understanding of the world. Now, for most of us in the West, we don't necessarily accept that. We may have some confidence in it. We may be questioning about it, but all these teachings are based on an acceptance of past and future lives, which really means that the consciousness, our mental aspect, is without beginning and is without end, has been in countless previous lives and will be in countless future lives. Okay, it means the mind is continuous. The body is shed, the mind continues. But that's not the subject of this class, but that's just kind of the ground on which the Lam Rim is based and acceptance of that. But most of it is extremely applicable, even if we have no confidence or no belief in past or future lives. It's all extremely applicable to this life, I think, but we do have to keep that in mind. So the first topic that we study in the lesser scope is the preciousness of this human rebirth. Okay, that this life is something unusual. We have wonderful characteristics of mind and body, and it's not to be wasted. Particularly if we accept other lifetimes, being reborn as a human is extremely rare and precious. So we have a great sense of the preciousness of this human life and how it's not to be wasted, okay? So that's kind of a feel-good topic. That's kind of neat. And then we get into the second topic, which is death, okay? This life is precious, but it's impermanent. It will fall apart. It will change. It won't be what we expect, and ultimately we will die. Death is inevitable. This precious human life will come to an end at some point. Okay, so that's the second topic in the lesser scope. Precious human life, death is inevitable, life is impermanent, everything falls apart. And then the third is thinking about karma, okay, which is the law of cause and effect, which the Buddha didn't invent. He just said that is the nature of reality, okay, that all our actions of body, speech, and mind will cause results that we will experience in the future, either in this lifetime or in future lifetimes, okay? So everything we're doing now will have an effect in the future. And if we meditate on karma, we realize that we have done a lot of things that are not that skillful, and that will inevitably cause us to suffer in the future unless we stop committing those actions, okay? So we have an understanding of karma will cause us problems in the future, okay? And then we come to the three jewels, looking at the qualities of the three jewels, the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, how they can help us avoid future suffering, okay? And the way to avoid future suffering is to take refuge in the three jewels, okay? So we start with life is precious, death is inevitable, karma will cause us to suffer. We can avoid that by studying the three jewels and taking refuge in them. That's personal liberation. That's the lesser scope, freedom from personal suffering. And that puts us in a place where we can begin to think about really helping others. I mean, certainly we help others and want to help others before we achieve personal liberation, but we frequently find that our problems and our own issues get in the way and we don't have the necessary wisdom to do it. So this lesser scope is about personal liberation. And we used the analogy last time of being in a field when a horrible lightning storm comes up. And that is being aware of our karma, okay? Sometimes the word fear is used. We're afraid of the results of our karma, not in a paralyzing way, but a type of fear that motivates us to do something about it. And that means heading towards that cave over there that we know is there, that we know would be a safe place during the storm. The cave is refuge in the three jewels because we've studied it, we've examined it, we've seen that the roof is solid, that it's not full of snakes and lizards and yucky things like that. And that would be a safe place for us to go during the storm. Okay, we're not going there because we think there may be someplace over there, or we wonder if there is, or we hope there is. We've made a very conscious study of the cave, and we know that it is a safe place. In the same way, we make a very conscious study of the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, and we realize that they are a valid source of refuge. So none of this is based on blind faith, okay? You don't say, oh, I just trust myself to the Buddha. No, you have to look at the Buddha or the Buddhas. You have to look at the Dharma. You have to look at the Sangha and judge them using your native intelligence and wisdom and see if these are valid sources of refuge for you. It's not blind faith, it's more confidence, because that you've looked at them very closely, examined them against your own experience, and you see that these are valid sources of refuge. To go to the cave, to take refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. And that is what, as I said, is the lesser scope practice of the Lam Rim, which the Lam Rim being the subject of these Discovering Buddhism courses. Okay. So last week I asked people to think about some of the things that they take refuge in. We take refuge in a lot of things in this world, some of them not so beneficial. Drugs, sex, I don't know whether we'd say rock and roll is beneficial or not. Intoxicants, though, certainly are probably not the best refuge, though they can give us temporary solace. We take refuge in our job for a lot of people. We take refuge in our possessions. We take refuge in our relationships. We take refuge in our family. We take refuge in our sense of who we are. You know, what kind of person I think I am. That can be a real sense of refuge. And the point is not to put those down as sources of refuge. They're all tremendous, or most of them can be tremendous helps on our path in this lifetime. but they are referred to as worldly refuges. Worldly not meaning meretricious or not valuable or not useful, but worldly in the sense that they will fall apart. They will split apart. They are not permanent, okay? They will dissolve. Everything dissolves, okay? So those are worldly refuges. But now we're going to look at the three jewels, the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, and see if they are more lasting sources of refuge, of the safe place to go, of the direction that we want to lead our lives in, okay? So we frequently talk about the outer refuge and then the inner refuge. Tonight, I'm just going to talk about the outer refuges. The inner refuge is really when all three of these, we've internalized them. They have become part of our being. But initially, we start by taking refuge in the outer Buddha, Dharma, or Sangha. And the Buddha, or we could say Buddhas, because there have been countless Buddhas throughout beginningless time, and there will be countless more Buddhas. But most commonly, we're referring to Shakyamuni Buddha, the historical figure who lived 2,500 years ago, who was an ordinary human being. He was not a god. He was not all powerful, but he, through sitting and working with his own mind, went from his present state of confusion and suffering that we all find ourselves in at times, and achieved enlightenment, which is a state of complete wisdom and complete compassion. Okay? So we see him as the example. He is someone who has reached the goal that we're aiming for, wisdom and compassion, and he's telling us how he did it. He's saying, this is the path I took. This is how I worked with my mind. He's not a god in that he's not all powerful. He can't do it for us. He can't remove negative qualities from our mind. He can't change our karma. He can't take away our suffering. What he can do is teach, and what he did was teach, set an example. Okay, so that's the first external object of refuge, the historical Buddha. And certainly, there are other beings who are Buddhas. We may recognize them, we may not. A lot of people say that His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, is a completely realized being, completely enlightened. There have been countless other Buddhas. So we're taking refuge specifically in Shakyamuni Buddha because we have such good records of his life and what he taught, but we're also taking refuge in all the other living beings who have achieved enlightenment. Those who have gotten to where we want to go, who have gotten to the top of the mountain and say, this is the path up, follow me, or do what I do if you want to get up here. You don't have to, but if that's your goal, I'll give you some advice and some pointers on how to get there. Okay. The Dharma is the teachings of the Buddha. This is the actual instructions on the path. As transmitted through all these texts we have and through direct lineages through the various teachers, they can trace themselves back to the historical Buddha. And in particular, we're talking in the lesser scope, the important topics are an understanding of impermanence and also of emptiness, which means, we really don't talk about this in the lesser scope, but for personal liberation, it means you have an understanding of emptiness, the way things really exist. And that's not the subject of this course, but the point is that things don't exist the way we think they do. They exist in a much more fluid and flexible way. Okay, so the Dharma is the teachings on impermanence and emptiness, and it's also teachings that help us rid our mind of all negative attitudes, which is mainly anger, attachment, and ignorance. Okay, so if we remove those negative attitudes from our mind, our behavior changes in that we're not hurting others. As His Holiness the Dalai Lama always says, as much as you can, help others. If you can't help them, at least don't hurt them. Okay, or as Venerable Rabina says, zip your lips and keep your hands to yourself. Okay, so if we really study the lesser scope, the result is an end to our personal suffering, which is achieved by not harming others. Okay, that's the main way we end our own suffering, by stopping to harm others. Okay, so that's really what the Dharma in the lesser scope is about. It's about seeing things as they exist and getting rid of those impulses in your mind that cause you to harm others. So that's the second jewel, the actual teachings of the Buddha that he discovered on his path to enlightenment. Again, he can't put those teachings in our mind. We have to do all the work on our own. You know, we can have wonderful teachers and examples and everything, but it's up to us to study them and work on our own mind. And the third jewel is the sangha. And we'll hear that that term is used in many aspects, in many ways. In terms of taking refuge in the three jewels, the sangha refers very specifically to what are referred to as arhats, or noble beings. And these are people who have completely realized emptiness, who see reality with no distortion and no delusions. So we're taking refuge in the arhats, the noble beings. Okay, they may wear robes, they may not wear robes. Okay, then we, you know, frequently at Kadampa Center, we talk about our sangha members, which are those people who have taken vows and are wearing robes. Those are the robed sangha, and they're wonderful examples, and we can take refuge for them in them. But that's not specifically what we're referring to when we talk about taking refuge in the three jewels. And then lots of times the whole community, everyone at Kadampa Center, for example, we talk about them as our sangha. And those are all proper ways to use the term, but you're talking about different things. So when we're talking about the three jewels, we're talking about taking refuge in the arhats, the noble beings. Okay, so these are the outer objects of refuge, the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. And so if we're interested in the Buddhist path, we need to look at them and see if they really hold up as worthy objects of refuge. And that's what we'll be talking about in the next few weeks. The qualities of the three jewels that make them worthy objects of refuge. And let's see. Can we open up for questions, Linda, now? See if anybody has a question or comment. Will that work in this format?
Absolutely.
Okay.
So if you have a question, you can either unmute, or you can wave at me, or you can do the little raise your hand with the little reactions. If anyone has a question. Julie, you're unmuted. Do you have a question? Oh, now you're muted.
Oh, I thought I was.
Oh, now you're muted, Julie.
Now.
Okay.
Okay, my question is, and I could go get it and read it exactly, but it says everything is a hallucination. So my husband's a hallucination. So we're all having one big hallucination. I need to understand this.
Okay.
And I understand it from a painter's point of view, because everything outside is really black and white.
Mm-hmm.
Because color is not a molecule, it is a frequency. So when I'm driving down the road as a painter, I just said, oh, this isn't right. There's something wrong here. I feel like I'm stuck in a video game.
Yeah. Okay, well, that's not the subject of this class, but
Oh, it's not? I must
That's-
have printed out the wrong.
that's okay. No, it's probably, that's okay. That's all right. That's in the class on emptiness, but I'm glad you brought it up. First off, when we say that things are a hallucination or they're empty, we're not saying they don't exist, okay? They very much do exist. Your husband is real. He exists. He just doesn't exist the way you think he does, okay? That's the whole point. It's that we have these huge obscuring filters between us and reality. And we get little glimpses of the way things really are, but we're not actually seeing what's really there. There's a lot of projection that we're throwing onto people and objects and experience, which is really just our own past that we're just throwing out there. So it's not saying that your husband is going to vaporize if you realize emptiness or not be there. You'll actually see him more realistically and more honestly and more directly. Okay. Does that help any? You're muted again.
Yes, it does help. I know that is what we see is not, yeah, it's hard to explain.
Yeah.
But I know, but he can't explain it. And it's really hard to stay in that
Yeah. Oh,
mind
yes.
space
Mhm.
going, okay, there's an object. Okay, just be careful over here.
Yeah. Mhm. In some ways, there's less there than we think there is, but in other ways, there's a lot more there also. I mean, all the karma and all the causes and conditions that have gone to create your husband, there's a huge amount there that you don't even see. But they say when we're a great meditator and we actually realize emptiness for the very first time, which means directly perceive it, it doesn't last. It's just for 30 seconds or a minute. Staying with that is very difficult, but ultimately it becomes the way we see the entire world. Okay. Any other questions or comments before we do our second meditation?
Just have a quick question,
Yeah.
Robert.
Mhm.
So after the Lamrim classes on Wednesday with Geshe-la, I've been more interested in reading and learning about Lama Tsongkhapa and Lama Tisha. Is
Mhm.
it's that okay to take refuge on them as well? On
Yeah.
their, is
Mhm.
that how?
Yeah. Uh-huh. But I mean, you have to realize that your ultimate refuge is the three jewels.
Yeah.
But if you see them as emanations of the Buddha or as Buddhas themselves, and you've looked at them and you've seen valid objects of refuge, sure, yeah. If that's putting you in the direction you want to go. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, so let's do our second meditation of the night. We'll do a little bit of just review meditation. So establish your posture. I think everybody's familiar with that by now. Three deep breaths from the abdomen. And take a moment and set your motivation. Generating the bodhicitta motivation. And now just a couple minutes of concentration meditation, placing the awareness on the breath in and out through the nostrils. And now we're just going to do a brief, what's called a review meditation of the stages of the lesser scope. The practices for individual liberation, for personal freedom from suffering, just so we get those fixed in our mind, because I think that's really helpful to see how one builds upon the previous one, moving us in that direction that we aspire to. So just for a moment, since it's taken as a given, past and future lives. Consciousness is without beginning and without end. The body is certainly temporary, but there's always a future moment of consciousness, always a previous moment of consciousness. Death and birth, as we think of them in the West, are merely physical phenomena relating to the body. But the consciousness is without beginning and is without end. So just think about that for a minute. What does that imply? And now we think about how precious this human life we have right now is. We have a mind that functions pretty well. We have a body that functions most of the time. We have enough to eat. We have a roof over our head most of the time. We're not living in a war zone. We're not living in a place where there's no food or water. And above and beyond that, we have access to wonderful teachers, either at Kadampa Center or other places or on the internet. There are so many things that make this human life we're living right now incredibly precious. We have so many things, wonderful things going for us right now. Sure, we have a lot of problems. That's not saying that life isn't without problems. Just the fact of having a human rebirth with a mind that functions is incredible. The odds against it are tremendous. And we have to realize that though this life is precious, it won't last forever. Even as we speak, our body is beginning to is continuing to disintegrate. It's a little different than it was just an hour ago. Our mind is changing, and it is a fact that we will die, that at some point this mind and body will separate. And this existence that I've known as Robbie or Linda or Mike or whatever, or Julie, will come to an end. That's not gloomy, that's just reality. Life is precious, but there will be a moment of death. And then we realize that during this life, this span of however many years, we are continually creating karmic imprints on our mind. Everything we say, everything we do, everything we think is making an imprint on our mind that will determine our future experiences. And some of those imprints are quite good and will cause us to be happy in the future. But a lot of them aren't so good, and they will inevitably cause us to suffer. Maybe in this lifetime, or if we accept future lifetimes, will cause suffering in future lifetimes. May cause us to experience future lifetimes in other realms that are much less suited for Dharma study than this human rebirth we have now. So we have some sense of, not necessarily, we could say fear or dread, but an understanding that our actions have consequences. Those consequences can be quite painful. And so not wanting to suffer in the future, which is a completely valid aspiration, His Holiness always says that. It's not selfish. It's not thinking only about yourself, but not wanting to suffer personally, we look for a place of refuge. And in particular, we look at the three jewels, the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. And we examine their qualities. Are they suitable refuges? Will they help me avoid suffering? Will they lead me in the direction I want to go? And if we look at them and they seem to be valid places of refuge, if they will help me to avoid my suffering in the future, then we actually do take refuge in them. We follow that direction. We follow the path that they outline for us. And that's the path to freedom from personal suffering, personal liberation. And you can do a brief dedication. Acknowledge that you've done something positive. One thing I forgot to mention earlier that just came to me, the actual definition of Dharma is that which separates us from suffering. So when we're talking, it's not just the dry teachings, but it's something that can actually separate us from suffering. So, homework for the coming week, continue the readings with the understanding that they don't necessarily parallel what we're talking about here, but that's okay. Sit in meditation 6 days out of the week. And I'd like you to do 10 minutes of meditation a day, 5 minutes of concentration meditation, 5 minutes of review of the stages of the lesser scope. And then I would like you to think during the week about the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha from what you know about them, which for some people may be quite a bit, for some people may not be that much. And think about what makes them valid places of refuge. What are their qualities that make them suitable refuges? So just think about that, contemplate that. And then the next 2 weeks, we'll talk about the qualities of the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. And then the last week of the class, we'll talk about the actual refuge ceremony and the 5 lay precepts and what's involved in that. So you have some familiarity with that. But the important thing, I think, is really to understand that refuge is not just a one-time event and you're done with it. It's a continual mental activity of moving towards the qualities of the 3 jewels. And everybody stay healthy. And thank you, Linda. And we'll see you next week. Okay?
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Robbie. Thank
Thank you,
you.
Robbie.
Yeah,
Thank you,
good
Linda.
night.
Thank you,
Good
Linda.
seeing everyone. Yes.
Linda.
Bye
Thank you,
bye.
I'll
Robbie.
be back at the center one of these days.
Thank you.
Good seeing everyone.
We're all turning into mushrooms.
Good night. See you
Night.
next week.